Hi, this is Dr. Carol Francis. On this course, we're talking all about being able to manage relationships while you're in the state of recovery. And this particular class is about having two-way conversations. And as basic as that really sounds on some level, it becomes really difficult when we're recovering from very deep complications to have two-way conversations because, one, we're either hiding from them because we don't want to disclose too much because we either feel ashamed or embarrassed or just overwhelmed, or this other person we may not even trust with that type of depth of information, and maybe we shouldn't, So how do we have a meaningful two-way conversation if we're not going to go to some of the most meaningful experiences that we're trying to recover from? Well, it's still nonetheless important because two-way conversations are very much a part of family, friends, and the workforce. And you want to be able to remember what it's like to have these normal conversations or relearn or learn for the very first time. So depending on where you are and what you've experienced in your abuse and trauma, you may or may not ever have had the opportunity to just learn the simple tools of a two-way conversation, or to value them, or maybe you learned them, but you've forgotten them because you've been embroiled in the nastiness of just surviving and then ultimately escaping the trauma and the abuse that you experienced. There are some situations that are shared traumas and shared abusive situations. Shared trauma, for example, is when a whole group of people have survived a shooter, or when a whole group of people have been over and served in the military and they've had conversations abroad, or a whole group of people have had an experience that's a natural disaster. These are shared traumas. But what's interesting is that even there it becomes difficult to have a two-way conversation that's on different topics, or even to understand the value of having in-depth two-way conversations with people that have shared traumatic experiences. So this is about two-way conversations with people who have not had your shared experience, and we're going to talk about four aspects of it. The chit-chat conversation, information gathering, which is really important for all relationships, forming connections, and then maintaining connections. So here we go. Let's talk about the chit-chat. And while it seems so funny to include this, chit-chat's actually incredibly important because it establishes a kind of easiness and rapport. It helps you understand if that other person can be safely communicated with, asked questions to, and also answered questions to, that they'll pay attention when you answer on an easy level, and that you will also pay attention to them when they're answering as well. So it establishes a comfort and a feeling of safety, a rapport with each other. And also this is an opportunity to just create some sort of familiarity, some space between the two of you that has some commonality. It also can just be a social way of just passing the moment. People go to cocktail parties or bars, or they go to football parties or things like that. It's like you have an opportunity just to have a casual conversation. And what's really important if you feel awkward about these chit-chat conversations is to actually practice having questions in your backpack of questions that produce chit-chat. Just having questions and also having answers. And that sounds really funny to be so programmed, but if you are not accustomed because you're traumatized and abused to having chit-chat conversations, then you may need to actually practice asking the questions and answering the questions on this very superly easy level. I was about to say superficial, but I want you to understand that a lot of the times when we've undergone trauma and abuse, we don't want to have chit-chat conversations. We want to either avoid all conversations because we have so much turmoil inside, or we want to talk about the very things that are most troubling us. So we forget to have this in-between area where everything is easy, a conflict-free connection that has nothing to do with anybody's abuse and trauma, nothing to do with anybody's complications. And that's a very important space to create between the two of you. It allows there to be an easy space, and you want to create an easy space for you as well. I remember in one of my interviews with Jade Rockemacher, who is an actor and also produced a wonderful program about soldiers that have survived in deployment in Afghanistan. It's a movie, documentary actually about his family, very well worth viewing. If you are a family that's suffering from the post-traumatic stress of a soldier returning, or a soldier returning it's an extremely helpful sort of thing to do. And one of the things that Jake did when he came back from interviewing all of these different soldiers, including his family, is he had a complete cultural shock. And he could not even stand the superficiality of people's responses to simple things like grocery stores or ordering guacamole on a burrito, that it was just so frustrating to hear people making a big deal out of things so little when he had seen huge and enormously traumatizing circumstances. And that is kind of reflective of what it's like for individuals entering into a real superficial, ordinary situation where there's no conflict, so to speak. And that's something that you want to put back into your communication capacity, because it really helps you with having ordinary, simple, conflict-free moments. The next thing is information gathering. And this is interesting because a lot of times information gathering is befuddled with errors because people will not communicate clearly, because we just don't all know how to communicate clearly. They won't provide all the specific details that are needed. They won't even understand that they need to do that or what the details are. And they'll feel like they've communicated one thing and it gets easily misinterpreted. So just gathering information with another person, again, it sounds like such a functional sort of thing that we should all be able to do because it's pretty pragmatic. But the truth is, when you have more than one person involved in an information gathering meeting, you suddenly have an opportunity for misinterpretation and misunderstanding and misinforming each other. So when you're in these information gathering situations, such as in work meetings or organizing something with your family or friends, what you want to be able to do is talk about just the pragmatics: location, time, what we're going to do, what we need to wear, right? Sounds really simple. What do I need to bring? What do I need to do? How do I need to be prepared? And being able to simply ask for clarity. Once I give you the information, here's the trick I'd like you to remember on this one. Repeat it. Say, let me just repeat this to you, making sure I've got the information right. And then repeat it. And then let them either correct something that they feel like you haven't heard right, which you may have heard correctly, but they're not sure you did once you repeated it. And then repeat their correction as well. That may or may not help them stop repeating it to you, but it is a way of establishing accuracy. Now, the thing is about accuracy is a lot of times when we're recovering from trauma and abuse, we don't have the patience for inaccuracy. We don't have the patience for it. Secondly, you must realize also, when we're suffering from abuse and trauma and we're trying to recover, our own memory storage is compromised for sometimes or periodically or for a period of time. And we don't want to rely on our memories because we may be in and out of focus, in and out of paying attention, and in and out of being able to remember things. So write things down, and in the day of technology, write things on your calendar. Do not just expect yourself to remember it. Ask them to send you a text with the details or an email. And also write it in a text to yourself, and then maybe text it to them as well, just making sure I'm understanding all the details and just list the details. This is a way of you being able to write it down, which helps you, one, have a source for when you do forget. Two, a reminder hooked into your calendar that dings at the right time. Three, a way of saying a communication that creates a mutuality between you and another person. And four, it helps you pay attention when otherwise your mind is really potentially going to race and be distracted in some other space. It'll also, next, help you not float away and be partially present and go, oh, yeah, okay, it sounds good, when you actually weren't even there remembering any of it. So being able to write it down in a way where you can actually pass it on to them, put it in your calendar, is a discipline that you want to implement for organizing information. And I would suggest to you that you write it down in whatever form is your style, writing it with a pen, pencil, or on your device, and then being able to share it as well. So I've seen individuals who are still recovering from abuse and trauma really unable to focus. And if they're taking any sort of medication for anxiety, depression, that ability to just remember things really gets compromised as well. So this information gathering communication is a two-way process, and you have to kind of know what you bring to the table that works with that and what doesn't, and then compensate, because chances are this is not going to bring your strong point at this point in time. You also may find that you're irritated with other individuals when they either don't communicate efficiently or clearly, or they make a mistake, that you might actually misinterpret them making a mistake as some sort of emotional attack because it makes you feel anxious, or it makes you feel unstable, or it makes you feel like there's an imperfection that you might, like being set up for being abused again, because that's been the manipulation of your manipulator in the past. So this ability to take the information, write it down, repeat it, and then share that information is a way of you also making sure that that other person has been clear with you without you feeling like they're either setting you up for failing or that they're somehow compromising your ability to cope as well. See, there's so much room for misinterpretation, especially when our emotions are deeply erratic with recovery. The next level I want you to look at is forming connections. And I want you to realize that there's really all different levels of connection. So here I was thinking that if you were going to toast a piece of bread, you might set the toast for light, medium, or dark. And dark is really reserved for those individuals that like their bread burnt, right? So you have to understand that when you're recovering from abuse and trauma, you've got a lot of darkness going on inside of you. The connections you have inside of you are dark. And connections with people who really are going to understand you and work with you, they're going to be able to go into that dark zone. But just remember, it's like toast. Most people don't like burnt toast. Some people do. And so most people are not really going to go into this two-way conversation with you, wanting to form a connection and dive into the darkness. Some individuals who have suffered a lot of abuse and trauma feel like they're really only connected when they're in that dark space, and that everything else feels superficial, artificial, unreal. And for those individuals, you really need to find those other people that can go into the darkness and also experience connection. But for majority of individuals, especially when you're forming relationships or trying to maintain a non-conflict oriented relationship, the dark space is just not the best of places to go. It just doesn't keep your experience with this other person either functional or safe for them or for you. Because if they can't handle it, you're going to feel rejected by the way they move off the topic. Or if they don't know how to respond, you're going to feel triggered by their lack of sensitivity. And they may be perfectly, wonderfully sensitive, but completely awkward in the way they respond. And you might take that response as a rejection, as opposed to they're just awkward or they're just so concerned and they don't want to cause any more harm. You could be completely misunderstanding an individual when they veer away from these dark things that you want to talk about. So you want to be aware that when you go dark, it is really a seriously intense experience for your listener, your partner. And also, it's rarely a mutual conversation. It's rarely a two-way conversation. It's something different. And this is one reason why psychotherapeutic relationships are absolutely essential. Or groups that have people who share an experience that was very dark are really helpful, because people come together for the complete purpose of being able to go dark with each other. And in 12-step programs, going dark with each other is absolutely okay. They do have rules for engagement. And what some of the rules for engagement are: you don't judge another person, you don't provide them advice, and you allow them to speak their full turn without interruption. And then you move on. You don't try to make your truth someone else's truth. You don't try to say your pain is worse than someone else's pain. You are not trying to moralize anybody with your message. You're just sharing your truth without judgment, evaluation. Now, sometimes when you're in psychotherapy, you go for the purpose of sharing dark, but also reworking the dark. And that means that you are going to be experiencing both the catharsis of sharing what's dark inside you and also the reworking of it. And that is a different type of experience as well. It goes way beyond just a two-way conversation. So forming a connection is all about being personal in your information, sharing common interests, common emotions, and common experiences. Notice that the word common is important for you to pay attention to, because you're investigating the groundwork in which the two of you can talk about something that's not just chit-chat, but that's enjoyable for the two of you, that you both wish to engage in. And that's the interesting experience on that level, is that we're both here to engage in it. We're going to talk a little bit about how you maintain those connections in the next section. So let's go for that. In all these conversations, no matter if they're chit-chat level or information gathering or forming just a connection or maintain the connection, the first thing you must always convey is that of respect. And the way we convey respect differs because everybody understands respect differently. So the common ones is that you are gauging what makes this other person feel comfortable. And you are deciding you're going to respect what their comfort level is, as opposed to hoist your need for a conversation on them. Because remember, that's not a two-way conversation. That's a therapeutic conversation. And you can say, I need a therapeutic conversation to people. Or you can say, we're going to have this two-way conversation in your own head. So you want to gauge what they're comfortable with and try to stay within that zone in order to maintain it. And at different times, they may be comfortable with different things. So if it's just the two of you, they may be more comfortable with going to the medium and the dark sides of connection. But in a group situation, they may want to keep everything very light. They may be much more comfortable with light conversation and light topics that are of common interest, and never want to go beyond that surface just because that's the way they're raised, or that's just what they can metabolize or understand. So let's move on. You also want things to be mutual. So you need to kind of recognize when you have dominated a conversation for an extended period of time, and actually an extended period of time in most conversations is no more than 2 minutes. And nowadays, that's even been reduced to 30 to 60 seconds because people have a shortened attention span. So you want to be mutual. So after you've talked for about 2 minutes, you can ask them another question. And again, one of the tools in doing this is having the questions in your mind to ask. And then that person engages for a period of time. So that's one way. Make sure you're sharing the time. In addition, you also, if you're trying to kind of hiding yourself in the conversation, be aware that other person may be talking, but they may also feel like this is really not a very mutual exchange because you're not doing any sharing. So in a given moment, you might just insert something about yourself or a response that you have and see how they're listening to you. And if they're in the capacity to listen to you and want to listen to you, then you explore again for this 30 seconds to 120 seconds, 2 minutes. You can say something to see how that is received and understood. Now, when I say 30 seconds to 2 minutes, I'm actually just talking about initial conversations, because as we get to know each other, we're not bound by these time limits. The time limit expands. Women can listen to each other for 5 to 60 minutes without interrupting and be completely engrossed in what the other person's saying. And they create a sense of mutuality by their nods and their yeses or their emotional expressions or their facial gestures and things of that sort. Men, on the other hand, don't typically, this is so stereotyped, don't typically want to carry on a conversation that long. And they typically, again, a stereotype, want to have a conversation that gets kind of to the bullet points. But that is not always true either. So sometimes in the intimacy of a deeper conversation, they want to learn and listen and be very attentive. But even in those circumstances, whoever the speaker needs to try to maintain a sense of mutuality in sharing the time and sharing the topic, sharing the platform. In the process of listening to one another, different things are really helpful. Listening by reflecting a word, oh, so you were da-da-da-da-da, and then you repeat what they say, or, oh, that must have felt such and such, and you label the feeling that you think they might be feeling to create a sense of empathy between the two of you, your understanding of them, or your caring for them. You're avoiding at these times, in order to create and maintain connection, you're avoiding criticism and judgments. You're not sitting there pounding them or finding fault with what they're saying or what they're expressing. Instead, you are engaging and asking questions that further the details of the discussion, or you're adding just a little bit of your own version of what they're talking about in order to create the sharing of the experience and the mutuality of the conversation. Next, I also want you to realize that in every relationship, there's always room for misinterpretation. When you have more than one person, there's going to be misinterpretations often. And a lot of people get very offended when they're misinterpreted, or they feel like you're not really listening if you're misinterpreting. Now, the truth is that misinterpretation is suggestive that the other person just simply understands what you're saying differently than the way you're saying it. Maybe your word choices don't mean the same to them that they do to you. Maybe the way you described it provoked memories and thoughts and experiences in them that were their way of translating your message. And because they're living their life, they're going to translate what you say from their point of reference. And in a conversation, someone having a point of reference that they have inside themselves does not mean that they misunderstand you or misinterpret you, but they have their own perspective on what's going on. So they can't go to what you are other than to the degree that they can have some empathy or respond to you with clarity, because they're always going to be coming to a conversation from their own perspectives. And that is a trigger for individuals recovering from abuse and trauma, because there's this sense of, I'm so misunderstood, so misinterpreted, when all the person's doing is trying to understand. So if someone gives you, like you mean this, and they give you something that's not on track, the first thing to do inside yourself is to appreciate that they're trying. The second thing is to let them know, I really appreciate you trying to understand me, and can I elaborate, because I think I didn't say it in a way that makes sense from where you're coming. And that way you're making sense from where you're coming doesn't fault you and doesn't fault them. Because from where they're coming from may have no trauma experiences in their life. They're not going to get it. But they may really care to understand. And remember, in the maintaining of connections, you're not always necessarily talking about the trauma, right? But you may still be kind of speaking to the edge of an emotion that's intense, kind of testing to see if they get you. And if they don't get you, you may feel like, well, that's a lost cause, as opposed to saying, well, appreciate you saying that. That's an interesting point of view. That's not exactly what I was meaning. I'd like to explain that to you. And you've opened up the door for allowing misinterpretation to be nothing but another person living their life. And the final thing about maintaining conflicts is that all relationships, marriages and raising children too, you always look to reduce conflict. You always look to reduce criticism. It is not helpful in relationships to create more conflict or to enhance criticisms. There's always a better way to connect with someone than to create conflict and to create criticism. And if you're in the midst of creating an argument or feeling irritated or feeling like you want to oppose or disagree in some sort of emotional fashion, then you're not just stating your opinion. You're actually verbally trying to conquer them or hurt them or dominate them. And those things are, while they're not abuse, they're more akin to that emotion of antagonism than they are to connection. And you have to walk away from a conversation where conflict and disagreement and criticism have been the predominant form of communication. Say to yourself, why am I so competitive with that person? Or why do I want to harm that person? Or why do I want to just make them feel wrong? What is going on in this relationship that instead of maintaining connection, I'm actually trying to destroy the connection and hurt the person and yourself in the process? So those are some guidelines, and just thinking about the two-way conversations you're going to have with people as you are relearning the art of having two-way conversations and recovering through those conversations as well. Okay, take care, and do enjoy the meditations, the guided imageries, and the exercises after you have written the knowledge gain questions and the self-reflection statements. And join me again for tomorrow or on the next class as we further explore what it means to be managing people in our lives, managing relationships in our lives when we are in the midst of recovering from abuse and trauma. Take care.